We begin in the Middle East, which is still reeling from the attacks on two oil facilities in Saudi Arabia over the weekend.
The strikes have sent oil prices soaring as accusations swirl about who is to blame. The attacks on facilities in Abqaiq and Krais have cut Saudi Arabia's oil production by roughly half. Houthi insurgents in Yemen have issued a statement claiming responsibility. The U.S. government released satellite images showing damage to 17 structures in Abqaiq, said to be the largest crude oil plant in the world. It's expected to take weeks for the two facilities to fully resume production. The Saudi-led military coalition said Saturday's attacks were carried out by a group with ties to Iran using Iranian weapons.
The weapons that were used in the terrorist attack, whether it be in Abqaiq or Khurais, initial evidence shows these weapons are Iranian weapons.
Iran has denied any involvement in the attacks, which cut global crude oil production by 5%.
Yemeni people are exercising their legitimate right of defense. The attacks are reciprocal.
But U.S. President Donald Trump has suggested otherwise.
Have you seen evidence, proof that Iran was behind the attack?
Well, it's looking that way. We'll have some pretty good, we're having some very strong studies done, but it's certainly looking that way at this moment.
Do you want war with Iran?
Do I want war? I don't want war with anybody.
Trump added the U.S. is considering various possible responses, but didn't elaborate. He also said Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will be traveling to Saudi Arabia at an undisclosed date.
Japan's top government spokesperson says the country is keeping a close watch on how the attack could affect oil supplies.
Japan will coordinate with relevant countries and organizations to prevent a negative impact on people's lives.
Suga says the government won't speculate about who may have been behind the attack, but is collecting and analyzing information. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is scheduled to talk with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani in New York later this month.
Earlier, we spoke with Koichiro Tanaka, an expert on Middle Eastern affairs, to get some insight into the attacks.
I'm seeing by the satellite imagery that these attacks were quite sophisticated and precise, and that means that this is not kind of a terrorist attacks like just the one that the Japanese foreign minister stated earlier on Saturday or Sunday. So I believe it's sort of a military state involvement I see here on this attack, and maybe I believe that highly if it's going to be the Houthis who have claimed responsibility, that the equipment at least have been provided or designed by Iran. And I won't rule that out. And there's a high probability that the United States and also the Saudis is going to retaliate on this. Just like the ones that happened earlier in May this year when the East-West pipeline was damaged by the drone attacks, as the Houthis have claimed even then, back then, I believe the drones or the cruise missiles have been launched somewhere inside Saudi Arabia soil. So I believe that there had been some sort of a local support, also local intel, and also a coordination on the ground. The Saudis are going to ask and request the United States to retaliate on their behalf, and also the Saudis are likely to have some sort of a coordinated, logistical support on the ground. The United States, just like in the attacks against Syria, it's likely that they could use drones, either drones or cruise missiles against Iranian military facilities and possibly against oil facilities as well. So it's going to happen. It's going to be really messy, and it's likely. My guess is that if it's going to ever happen, it's likely to happen in the coming days.
Okay, so
there's a lot of political events that is going to happen this week and next week. So if the United States are going to act, they're going to act now.
Now, Yuko Fukushima has more on how the attacks in Saudi Arabia are affecting the business world.
Yes, the disruption to Saudi Arabia's oil production has triggered concerns about global supply, driving crude futures sharply higher in markets around the world. In New York, West Texas Intermediate jumped 50% from last week at one stage on Monday. Local media say it was the biggest daily rise since the Gulf War in 1991. In London, Brent futures briefly soared almost 20%. It's now come down a bit and trading at $67.95 a barrel. Tokyo markets reopened on Tuesday after a long weekend. Here, crude futures for February soared by more than 10%. The attacks have cut Saudi Arabia's oil production by about 5.7 million barrels per day. That's roughly half of the country's output. The Saudi government has not said how long it will take for the damaged facilities to return to full operation, but some Western media have reported it may take several months. The Saudis are aiming to ease the impact of the disruption by releasing reserves. The U.S. government has also authorized the release of the country's strategic oil reserves. President Donald Trump tweeted he has approved the move if necessary. The president added he has instructed all relevant agencies to expedite approval of oil pipelines currently in the permit process in Texas and other states. Japan relies on Saudi Arabia for over one-third of its crude imports. But the Economy, Trade and Industry Minister says there is no immediate problem with the country's domestic supply, as it has oil reserves for more than 230 days of domestic consumption.
The government will ensure supply by working together with the International Energy Agency and other countries. Japan could release some of its reserves if necessary.
Sugawara said his ministry will carefully monitor the impact on Japan's supply as well as moves in the oil market. I talked to Naohiro Nimura, head of Market Risk Advisory and an expert on the oil market. I asked him where he thinks the price of crude is headed. Nimura pointed out that the 5.7 million barrels a day of output that Saudi Arabia lost is not easily replaced.
If this situation continues for the week or several weeks, the Brent crude price will hit $75, and also the WTI will hit above the $70. Then now the OPEC has 5 million barrels per day spare capacity, but as you know, the Saudi Arabia already cannot have any spare capacity, and we cannot expect Iran's increase of the oil production. So OPEC cannot cover this 5.7 million barrels shortfall.
But Nimura says for oil importers, the disruption comes at a time when prices were hovering at low levels due to sluggish demand.
Now the global economic slowing down will push the price lower. And also the U.S. decides to release the strategic oil reserve. Also, this will push the oil price also lower.
Nimura says the situation is still very unpredictable because not much information is coming out of Saudi Arabia on when the oil processing plants will resume operation. But his worst-case scenario is pretty serious.
Maybe we should see about $100 crude, both Brent and WTI. Because if the war starts between Iran and Saudi Arabia, we should think about the Strait of Hormuz. If the Strait of Hormuz is crossed, 20 million barrels crude passes every day. So that is 1/5 of world consumption. Very huge deficit will occur. Maybe we cannot cover that deficit by destocking the strategic reserve. It's impossible.
And I'll be back with the rest of the business later in the program.
Thank you, Ko. The leaders of Russia, Turkey, and Iran say they have agreed who will sit on a committee tasked with rewriting Syria's constitution. The move ends a years-long stalemate over how best to negotiate a political solution to the country's civil war.
Presidents Vladimir Putin of Russia, Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, and Hassan Rouhani of Iran met in the Turkish capital of Ankara on Monday. All three countries are allied with forces involved in the Syrian conflict. Russia and Iran back Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, while Turkey supports anti-government rebels. The leaders issued a joint declaration saying the civil war can only be ended through a political process that involves the Syrian people themselves. The UN Security Council adopted a resolution 4 years ago calling on the warring sides to form a constitutional committee to be followed by democratic elections. But the process hit a brick wall over disagreements about who should get to take part. At a news conference, Putin said it was important to create an environment in which the committee could succeed.
The people involved in this process, meaning Syrian people who are members of the Constitutional Committee, should not be bound by foreign pressure.
The comment could be seen as a veiled warning to the United States not to interfere in the peace process.